Greetings, class. Today I want to talk to you about Puritan society in New England. From the selected essays, I chose to read John Winthrop's City of Women by Laurel Ulrich. In this essay, she argues that we have sort of a misguided view about patriarchy and women's roles in Puritan New England. A lot of that's based off of the Anne Hutchinson trial. But what she does is she looks at John Winthrop's journals and examines, what he says about gender. And ultimately, what she determines is that gender was not really the focus of Winthrop. He didn't place an emphasis on it like we probably assumed that he did. She shows cases where Winthrop talked about women being assertive, women, challenging certain legal rulings, women running farms and things like that. And she also shows the accountability that Winthrop held men to. So, for example, there's some parts in her essay where she discusses some things such as rape and sexual abuse, adultery, women who are promiscuous and things like that. And Winthrop doesn't really distinguish between the men and the women. In the cases of the men, he holds them accountable. In cases of the women, he holds them accountable as well. It's not like the men are free to get away with anything and the women aren't. Now there's obviously some things that you have to take into account from the time period about how certain things are viewed and how Puritans viewed those things, such as religion and sexual natures and things like that. But her overall point is that there was an individualism present in New England that you have to take into account. You can't just base it off of a gender study and say, well, this is how it was for women, this is how it was for men. There was a lot more agency from person to person, regardless of gender. Michael Kaufman wrote a historiographical essay called Post-Secular Puritans, Recent Retrials of Anne Hutchinson. And again, Anne Hutchinson sort of being the event that provokes the study, but he studies Puritanism in general and historians' views of Puritanism and recent scholarship, and he says that recently there has been an approach to take individual agency into account, and he says that you can't just study something like Puritanism on the basis of race, gender, sex, religion. He says, there's a lot more to it than that. It's complicated, and you need to focus more on the individual event and the circumstances surrounding that event rather than just a blanket interpretation of this is what it was like in New England. A third essay by Michael Winship titled Were There Any Puritans in New England also follows this line of thought. So he starts with an English minister, Robert Sanderson's definition of Puritan and what he says a Puritan is. And Sanderson's definition of a Puritan is anyone who practiced or advocated nonconformity to the ceremonies of the Church of England. Well, Winship takes that definition and he says, well, by this case, there's a lot going on there. He says that if you study the Puritans in New England, they're different from the Puritans in the Old World. So English Puritans and the New England Puritans are sort of branching in different directions. He says within the Puritan communities themselves, there's not a strict box that you can put the Puritans in. There's disagreements among Puritans, and he says that in some cases scholars have even just used the term Puritan as a blanket to cover, a blanket that's applicable to all immigrants to New England regardless of what they believe. So he says that the word Puritan has been used too loosely, or maybe if it's not too loosely, then there is no definition for it. Like we have created this box and we try to place all these people into it and call it Puritanism, but yet There's a lot more individuality. So again, the theme of individual agency comes into play here. There is uh, no two prominent people from the past that we would call Puritans, and there's lots that we would call Puritans, but they don't all fit in the same mold. And so, and he says even more so in America than England. So we either have to try to redefine that term Puritan, or we have to admit that it's a term we can't really define, and instead just admit that there were some common goals, some shared beliefs, but there is no strict definition that we can say this is what a Puritan is. And when we do that, it sort of throws off our whole study of Puritan New England. So, three articles here, they all seem to emphasize that there was a lot of personal autonomy, individual agency in New England within this sphere of Puritans. So, we can't just have an image of our head that this is what it was like in Puritan society and try to base everything off of that. We have to look at the events themselves, the context of what's going on, and use the Puritan framework to sort of figure out how to interpret that historically. Thank you.